restart the meeting. Now that we had a short break, and Representative Bierman.
Okay.
And let me get my self cleared up here. We're talking House File 1471.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee.
And I'll move House File 1471 to be held over for possible inclusion in our omnibus bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Representative Hellstrom.
Okay.
Welcome to the Bierman. Welcome to the committee. My
Thank you.
Working right yet here, and
Thank you.
Please describe your bill.
All right. Thank you. 1471 is a proposal to set history straight by recognizing all Minnesota veterans who served in World War I by correcting a dedicated memorial plaque. This plaque is located on the Capitol grounds in the Court of Honor. Unfortunately, the current plaque does not recognize all Minnesotans who served. You should have in your packet some remarks by Chaplain David Thompson, retired Navy. He's done a testimony for me previously on this bill. He's done some history. His father was a World War I veteran, and I'll just highlight some of the remarks that he made in this brief testimony. This plaque is dedicated to 118,000 Minnesotans who served in World War I. Unfortunately, the plaque only lists 57,000 who so gallantly served to end the war, to end all wars. Many veterans excluded on the memorial were non-AEF veterans who served on convoy duty at sea in the U.S. Navy or were part of the 2.7 million soldiers, sailors, and Marines who were still in training bases at the United States when the war ended. It's a good look at history if you read the entire thing, and the flu pandemic that afflicted the country at that time killed more troops in training bases in the United States than were killed in World War I, some 36,000 of them in 3 short months at the end of the war. And that is more than all the troops killed in the entire 3-year Korean War. So this is a large, yet most of them were excluded from this World War I memorial and largely forgotten by the history books. So this would just be an act to replace that plaque and correct history and make sure that all veterans, Minnesota veterans who answered the call to service and joined in the fight in World War I deserve the honor and respect with an accurate memorial that helps us remember their deeds and service to our country and our state.
Any questions of the testifier? Representative Albright.
Actually, a comment for the author of the bill. Thank you for bringing it forward. Thank you for recognizing those that may not have seen active duty, but certainly served their country across all divisions. So I appreciate your bringing this forward, Representative Bierman. And to the chair, with regard to its inclusion or possible inclusion in the state government finance omnibus bill, if that's the case, based upon the character of 1471, would that require a obligatory stop and rules because of plaques and memorialization? Maybe we can get Mr. Gehring to talk about that.
Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, House Rule 4.14 provides that a bill that proposes to have a memorial placed in the capital area must be referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
So, Mr. Chair, if I might suggest an amendment to the motion to re-refer it to the to rules.
As you can see, I'm shaking my head. I think you're right that we can redo that. I'll amend my motion when we get to that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, thanks for bringing this bill. I'm a Navy dad. I want to make sure that our service members are properly honored in their service and in the totality of their service, so making sure that everybody is included is a good thing. So thank you for bringing this bill.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on this bill? Any other member questions or comments? If not, I'll renew my motion that House File 1471 be re-referred to Ways and Means with the re-refer to Ways and Means. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? You're on your way.
Thank you, committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Gomez. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And held over? I'll move that House File 2249 be laid over for possible inclusion. Describe your bill.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So House File 2249 exempts licensed eyelash technicians from the Cosmetology Board's facility licensing requirements. Prior to 2016, eyelash providers weren't regulated in Minnesota. In 2016, the legislature created an occupational license for eyelash providers. This occupational license requires technicians to obtain 38 hours of training, and they're required to comply with strict infection control standards. This doesn't change that portion of the requirements to do this work, but state law requires eyelash technicians work in licensed salons, and so the requirements of a licensed salon include employing a salon manager or becoming a salon manager themselves, which requires 2,700 hours of additional experience, passing an exam, and then there are also physical requirements associated with the salon licensing that can, in certain cases, have necessitated really major like physical modifications to space that can be really costly. So this just kind of removes the barrier of requiring that these activities take place in a licensed salon. And I have a couple of testifiers.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the tape.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Brenda Tots. I live in Alexandria, Minnesota. I've been an eyelash technician for 13 years, and I have owned my own lash business since that time, and am at my current facility for the last 9 years. And I'm in support of this bill for 3 reasons. First, in order for me to continue working last year, I needed to install plumbing and hand washing sinks in a 1-level building that is less than 1,000 square feet due to the facility license. I spent $9,000 doing this. I don't own the facility, and being in the middle of my lease, the owner allowed me to make these changes as long as upon leaving, I agreed to remove the sinks and plumbing at my own expense. I do not know what that will cost in the future. Secondly, I'm also paying for 2 facility licenses that cover basically the same things. One is with the Board of Health for permanent makeup, and one is with the Board of Cosmetology for the eyelash extensions. So for me, I feel like the state is double dipping. Lastly, I also support this bill for all the women who own businesses like my daughter and my daughter-in-law who work with me and would not have been able to make the changes required for the salon facility license. And unfortunately, some women have had to close their business for that reason. I feel the facility license has been burdensome. It's unnecessary, especially since all eyelash technicians are still required to follow standards of cleanliness and sanitation, and we are all held accountable with our individual licenses. I will answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Members, any questions for this testifier? Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to speak on this bill? Oh, I have, no, that's Megan Forbes? Megan, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Megan Forbes, and I'm an attorney at the Institute for Justice. My colleagues and I support House File 2249 for many reasons, but to be brief today, I'll focus on one. This is an opportunity bill. It's a jobs bill. It's consistent with our values here in Minnesota of ensuring that all people have opportunity, and it's also consistent with the commitment that many members have to helping small businesses and women and minority-owned businesses succeed here in the state. We thank the committee for considering this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Any questions of the testifiers? Seeing nobody, thank you. And next on my list, I guess, is Gina Fast, who told me she's going to be slow. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the tape.
Thank you. Gina Fast, the Executive Director for the Board of Cosmetology. And I modified, it did say good morning, but we are now at good afternoon. So as many of you are aware, the board is statutorily mandated to protect the citizens' health and safety through regulating cosmetology-related professions by not only licensing, we do inspecting, we do compliance and enforcement, we write rules, and we, in particular, those rules to relate to promoting infection control, and this includes eyelash extensions. The eyelash extension legislation, which was driven by the eyelash technician that previously just testified and originally agreed upon by her, as well as the Institute for Justice and the board, was recently settled after years of debate at the legislature. And the rules were finalized by the Office of Administrative Hearings in October of 2017, where no hearings were requested related to eyelashes. I would like to correct earlier testimony that the board always has felt that the eyelash services were a part of the scope of practice. Honestly, I'm perplexed how year after year the issue of regulation, partial deregulation, continues to arise related to eyelash extensions. It's confusing for the public, it's confusing for service providers, and we've had calls from licensees stating confusion, frustration, and disbelief. This procedure is close to the eye. It's delicate where glues and adhesives are used. Eye packs with gels are used close to the skin. Eye diseases can happen, injuries, and eyelash mites. The services need not to only be done by a licensed person, but in a licensed salon, which does include inspecting. Minnesota Statute 155A.31 states that the board shall direct its resources first to those that fail to meet requirements of the law and that present a greater risk to the public or otherwise in the opinion of the board demonstrated that they require a greater degree of regulatory attention. We will never know if any of these eyelash facilities pose a risk because we will not be able to inspect nor hold any salons accountable. In addition, facilities will not be required to demonstrate compliance with professional liability insurance. The board's inspectors, while visiting salons, are generally not witness to injury on the spot, but they're witness to subpar to negligent infection control practices, lack of disinfecting, reuse of tools, as well as licensing infractions. Inspections are where we see the best of the best and the worst of the worst and everything in between. I'm also unclear why the legislation would move the manager license. Removing the manager license is limiting providers to decide what type of license they want. You're removing job opportunities, not creating more or removing barriers. Some salons, even if this bill passed, will require practitioners to have a manager's license, including potentially eyelash technicians, and they won't be able to because the license will not exist. We currently have a total of just under 16,000 licensed managers in about 5,500 salons, so it's not possible that all of these people who are licensed as managers are doing it to fulfill a board or legislative requirement. They're doing it because they want to, or possibly their employer requires it. In conclusion, we are not supportive of this legislation as it doesn't align with the statutory policy set out by the legislature or the board's mission. So I'm happy to answer questions. I know you have another testifier as well.
Members, any questions for this testifier? Representative Huot.
Mr. Chair, to the testifier, can you really quickly tell me how many complaints you received since these people were licensed?
Ms. Fast.
I Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I don't have that number in front of me. There was a prohibition on the legislature for us enforcing any complaints for about 2 years, or for 1 year, excuse me, when we did have several complaints filed, but we could not investigate any of
Okay,
them.
so, I'm sorry.
Representative
So I
Hewitt.
just wanted to go quickly. So to date, you really don't have any record of complaints about this industry that we're talking about this on, right?
Ms. Fast.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, when complaints are filed, we are looking at all type of infection control related in the salons. So whether it's specifically to eyelash extensions, there may or may not be infection control because we're looking at the dispensary in which the implements are disinfected.
Okay. Then last question. Has any,
Representative Hewitt.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Has anyone been hurt, harmed, or any damage has been caused by anybody in this industry that you know of in Minnesota?
Ms. Fast.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, in fact, from sitting not as the executive director of the board, but as a personal, if you Google online, you will definitely see injuries. And yes, talking to eye doctors, they have reported in Minnesota that individuals are going to see them for injuries related to the application of eyelash extensions.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Hewitt.
one real quick question. In your role, in your on, have you taken or seen anyone harmed or hurt by this industry?
Ms. Fast.
Mr. Chair and members, I'd have to get back to you on that statistic.
Thank
I don't
you.
have the complaint with me.
I'm done.
Representative Nash.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thought I could help Representative Hewitt out. We had the pleasure of having this bill in this same room last year. Representative Flanagan carried the bill. I was supportive then. I'm supportive now. I asked the same question that Representative Hewitt did, and I checked my notes. And you said at that time last year that at that point you had not. So thanks, Mr. Chair, and there's your answer.
Ms. Fast.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, last year, which would have been 2018, there was a point where the legislature prohibited the board from investigating any complaints, and in 1 year there possibly could be there could have been complaints. I don't have that statistic with me today.
Thank you, Ms. Fast. See no other questions, and we can go back. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Reed, or excuse me, Representative Gomez, thank you for bringing this bill forward. Appreciate the opportunity for people to participate in the marketplace and be active in capitalism. So thank you for this bill.
I have a further, Mr. Hurst. Please state your name for the tape and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. For the record, my name is Jim Hurst. I'm here today on behalf of the Minnesota Salon and Spa Professional Association, a trade group that represents all of the thousands of licensed practitioners of cosmetology in the state, which includes hair, skin, nails, and also eyelash extension service providers. I'll be very brief in stating that we also echo our concerns that you heard from the previous testifier. The state association views that licensing of these facilities is critical as to make sure that all of this is done properly. And as the previous testifier indicated, the best way to make sure that practitioners and everyone is abiding by what is the key issue, infection control issues, is required with inspections. And the only way inspections can occur is when the state board knows where to find these facilities. Failure to do, by carving out an exemption of this type would create a loophole whereby all other salons practicing full cosmetology measures would still be inspected. However, these individual standalone salons would not be. And then we look at the potential for this becoming a precedent because there are individual salons that are specializing only in nail care. So then do we then take the next step and say, well, let's not require licensing for these facilities? Overall, I'd like to remind the committee that the legislature has set forth within Chapter 155A, which is the statute governing cosmetology, that the legislature's finding says that the health safety of the people of the state are best served by licensing the practice of cosmetology, which includes, by definition, eyelash extension services. Yes, there are very serious health matters involved with this practice. We're talking about sharp instruments being used in very close proximity to your eyes. If those implements are not sterilized between clients, you run the risk of transferring diseases from one client to another. And these diseases can, in the worst case, actually result in blindness. Fortunately, we have not seen or heard of any cases that severe here, but I will end by saying that the Cosmetology Association that I represent, one of our tasks is to offer what are called compliance classes. Compliance classes are offered for salons, for practitioners who have been cited in inspections to come in for basically a remedial class. And just recently, a couple weeks ago, one of our classes did feature an eyelash extension professional who has a salon. It's my understanding at the conclusion of that class, he stated that by all means, the class was very helpful, even though he had had his 38 hours of instruction prior to getting licensed. But he said adamantly that certainly when asked, certainly licensing is critical to make sure that we're not being put in a reactive nature with these diseases and when we should be proactive with the current law. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will conclude my remarks and certainly welcome any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Questions for members? Representative Hewitt.
I'm sorry, I was going to ask that. No, I'll ask when we're done. I'm going to bring somebody back up, so I think Sandy. Sorry, Mike.
Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To anybody at the desk, do you know if people that, I mean, it was mentioned that you have separate facilities for people doing their nails. Do those people have to be licensed?
Mr. Hurst.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Mason, yes, both the salon facility as well as the practitioners must be licensed to offer those services.
Okay.
Representative Mason.
All right, and just a comment, I guess I would feel safer going to a nail facility than having somebody put in doing anything around my eyes. So there seems to be a certain inconsistency here in safety. Thank you.
Any questions? Representative Hewitt, you can ask your question and we'll bring up whoever we need to bring up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to bring up the salon owner.
Thank you, Mr. Hurst.
Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Brenda Tots.
Thank you. Real quickly, you own a salon. Would you ever let anybody go near one of your customers without having proper training to do this procedure?
Ms. Tots.
No, everyone needs to have proper training. So,
Mr.
Representative
Chair,
Hewitt.
and that would be done by OJT on-the-job training, and you would be pretty good with that?
No.
Probably, no?
no, we have
Tots.
to, Chair and Representative, we have to have proper training to do this. And it is the same with all salon. And my understanding is when you go for hair, nails, or skin, you also need to have training, but it is a basic training that you get. So when you leave, you still need to continue doing what you're doing, and you get good by practicing. And the same is with the eyelashes.
So would you call it I'm
Representative
sorry, Mr. Chair, would you call it a certification course, for a better word?
Ms. Tots.
It is a license, being licensed right now. So I did just want to comment about the mites they were talking about. We all have mites in our eyes, and in the normal proportion, they are beneficial. And when it gets out of control, that has more to do with your own standard or your own cleanliness of your own eyes, not just going to an eyelash salon and transferring mites back and forth. And I did want to mention that.
Mr. Chair, one last
Representative
statement.
Hewitt.
And in 30 years as an EMT, which is really not a licensed profession, it's a certification profession, I learned a lot more on the job and as I do, and they didn't let me touch any patients until I was actually trained well enough to do so. So I'm in a very similar situation as your salon. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for you, and then a statement. You made a motion to lay this over for possible inclusion.
Yes, sir, that was,
I think last year we sent it to the floor.
what's that?
I thought last year we sent it to the floor, and I would be in favor of making such a motion if it was at all possible to give it the best chance of becoming law. So I'm wondering if you're open to amending your motion and sending it to the floor so it could actually get a vote on the floor and in the general register.
Well, with Representative Nash, my understanding is in the Senate, they put it in, they held it over for possible inclusion, so even if it went to the floor, got voted off our floor, it's not in the pipeline in the Senate, so
Got it.
that would be more of a way of killing it than it would be to helping the bill
And I
along.
don't want that, Mr. Chair. And then, Mr. Chair, finally, this is a really good bill. And I thank you for picking up the bill from now Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. This is an empowerment bill. This is helping women who would like to open up a business to do so, to make a living, doing something that doesn't require a tremendous amount of space and as a result doesn't require a giant rent. I think this is a very good thing for us to do. Here's your chance to do a bipartisan bill unanimously out of the committee. And again, just thank you for bringing the bill, and I give it my full support.
Any other questions? If not, we'll hold this over for possible inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members.
Representative Hewitt. Representative Hewitt, do you want to move your bill for possible inclusion?
Mr. Chair, I do. I would like to move it
1740.
for possible inclusion, 1740. Members, all my testifiers are gone, so this worked out good. Anyways, I wish Representative Creashaw was here because when I started this process as a freshman, he said there's nothing original and no bill is easy. Well, he got the second part right, but I actually found a bill that is original. I was really surprised by this bill actually not being somewhere in our archives. What this bill is it came to me when I was driving to the Capitol the first time, and I looked up and I said, I wonder where those flags go. And I asked around, and no one really had an idea. There's some programs that are unofficial that they're using them for right now on top of the Capitol, but nothing really hard hit. And then I kind of thought, why am I thinking this? Well, when I was in 1970, I came home from kindergarten one day, and my mom was home. She worked at the post office. I got the mail, brought it up the driveway. She opened up the mail, and I was sitting there, and she said, oh, look, there's a card from Ray. It's my birthday. So we looked at her birthday card. She was in the kitchen making lunch, and there was a knock at the door. As a 5-year-old, I ran to the door, and I looked up, and there's a soldier at the door. He said, son, is your mother home? We knew right, when I said, Mom, there's a soldier at the door, she knew right away what she was going to be told. That day there, November 7th, 1970, our family became a Gold Star family. My brother was killed in action in Vietnam. The next thing about the whole ordeal, being 5 years old, was the funeral, is what I remember. And I remember, it was like it was yesterday, I remember them presenting the flag to my mother. And they said, on behalf of a grateful nation and the president, we'd like to present you with this flag, which is sitting here before us. To this day, this is a very valued possession of my family. My parents are long gone. There's 6 of us left in the family, and had to sign my life away to take it here today. But it meant something to us. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat if we could do something like that as legislators for our people in Minnesota here, our first responders, our police officers, our EMTs and our firefighters, our prison officers, our conservation officers. And so I brought the idea to my mentor, our chair, and he said, well, go for it and see what happens. And it was a long journey, because how does this work? How do we write this? How do we do it? And then I started getting calls from veterans groups, and they say, well, how can we donate to this fund? And so I really didn't know where to go or how to do it, but it all worked out, went to administration. We had a lot of work to do on this bill. I didn't move the amendment yet, Mike. We had a lot of work to do on this bill. We went to administration. No one knew how to identify this, but we had to find out where to do that. Administration said we would like it to be identified through somebody other than us. So what I did is I went to both branches of the legislature and said, well, let's have the reps be the people that are requested. So if you have a line of death duty, they would request it from you, or they can request it from the Senate. That kind of came up, and then we would make the request to administration to take the flag, and that was flown on that day and given back to us, and we will actually make sure the families get it. We would do the verification. And that's the next question. How would we do the verification? Well, the state actually has this in place. Through the first responders and the public safety, there is a death benefit that's paid out. So we would easily be able to identify that. Now, also, because you're in your communities, you will know who is a line of duty death. For the most part, and going backwards, we would have to do some work on that yet. But for first responders, it was pretty easy because there is a death benefit paid out for first responders of private ambulance companies and public companies. And then the second one was the military had trouble with how would we find out a line of duty death if we weren't informed by the military. Well, there is a way to find it out, and I wish they would have talked to me about this, but there is a gold star license plate that the legislators did years ago that actually has that database in it. So there was 2 areas there that would be really easy to find out going forward. So that was the area that I kind of went into, and we got it going, and now it's before you. It's been through vets. It's in the Senate. The Senate holds it right now in the vets area. We have it here. That's where the program sits. So, Mr. Chair?
And you said you have a delete all amendment here? You want to put that amendment on?
I would like to do a delete all amendment and put that amendment on to get it in the position where we want it.
So Representative Hewitt moves the DE, the H1740 DE1-1 amendment. All in favor of the amendment to put the bill in the form that the representative wants, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes. So we're on the bill. Any questions, members? Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Hewitt, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I think this is just honestly a small token of appreciation that should be afforded to everyone that pays the ultimate price for preserving the freedoms that are enumerated in our Constitution. So thank you for that. Just a point of clarification. I note in the verification of eligibility section that it can be administered by the Chief Sergeant at Arms, either in the Senate or in the House. And so I'm just wondering, for notification purposes, if that's coordinated with the LCC, or is that through either the majority or the minority leader's office, or how that might work?
So, Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, great question. The reason the Sergeant of Arms was mentioned in there is because we needed a constant. I don't know if I'll be here after 2 years, so I wanted to make sure that the program would continue. So I contacted the Sergeant of Arms. He worked with the other. We need to have them kind of orientate us as new members come in, and this is one of their responsibilities. As far as your question goes, there might have been some confusion when we got through with the reversion, but we may have to write it again. The verification will be done through our offices, so we'll be working with that in the LAs. I'm hoping that we'll pick that up. I don't think this is as complicated to verify this as people are making it, actually.
Mr. Chair, just a Question, and
Representative Albright.
this might be just for Ms. Roberts, but in the appropriations section, I note, not to question the need for support of this bill, but I'm just, it says the appropriation is available until spent. Do we know why we arrived at 31,000?
Representative Hewitt, or Ms. Roberts, Ms. Roberts.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, this was it was interesting because we don't have a number, right? And it actually is double this, and I wanted it cut in half because I also want to have room for people to make donations. Like I said, I've already heard from Legion Post and other firms that actually want to start donating to the fund. And so we cut the initial amount so that it was actually double what you're seeing. But we really did not have a way to find out, because if we go back, how many people will actually request this? So then we actually turned it into a grant too. So it's a granted fund. Once it's gone, it'll be gone. And then in 2 years, the legislator can decide if they want to refund it or go forward with it.
Representative Albright.
And
I'm just wondering if,
help.
well, I appreciate your answer. I'm wondering if Ms. Roberts can articulate what was just said.
Ms. Roberts.
Mr. Chair, members, I believe that the 31,000 is based on the fiscal note on the bill as it was originally drafted and just for 1 year of funding. And it's based on some assumptions that the Department of Administration made on the number of flags that they thought might be requested, and then some costs for providing certificates and possible postage. But they did note that that it was really difficult for them to make any kind of estimate of what the demand would be for this.
Thank you, Ms.
Representative
Roberts.
Albright.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Hewitt.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Hewitt, can you tell me, is this retroactive?
Representative Hewitt.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, yes, we would leave it open, one flag per family of lost soldiers. I could apply for one for my brother, yes.
And Mr. Chair.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Representative Albright's question of just a second ago, if we do this and it's retroactive, and I think of somebody in my own district who we just passed a bill that will be coming to our own floor to rename a highway for a fallen firefighter. If we do that initially, I wonder if it would exhaust that fund. So I wonder if we look at a larger, and I get the grants and donations, but we don't know what that will be. And I wonder if we just, imagine me offering to spend money, but again, yeah, dear diary, Nash wanted to spend money. But I just wonder if this would be better that we increase it slightly to start off with and maybe taper it in the out years. I don't know, but assuming that we can't guarantee donations and grants up front, we might want to look at that number.
Representative Hewitt.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, thank you. It's nice to hear that. However, I'm hoping there's another option here where the family can buy a flag directly or someone can buy it for them. I would be happy to look at that, though, as we go forward here, if we can go forward, and we might end up with this next year. I don't know yet. But, yeah, I think there's things to look at. And is there any other questions that I have?
Representative Nash. Any other questions? Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak to this bill?
Is there anybody back there?
Well, thank you,
I wanna
Representative Hewitt.
close up
And
here.
with that, I'll lay this bill over for possible inclusion.
Mr. Chair, can I close real quick?
Yes, you go ahead and close.
So I appreciate the committee hearing this bill for me. I just want to share one quick story with you. From Representative Quam's district last night, I was able to present an award to a paramedic that was killed in Gold Cross. I'm sorry, that wasn't Representative Quam. It was in Gold Cross area up in St. Cloud actually this year. And it would have been nice to also include a state of Minnesota flag. So let's hope we can get through this, and hopefully in the time I'm here, we're able to get it done. Thank you.
And Representative Hewitt, as I've told you when we were talking about this, my brother, when he was in the Army, one of his early times, he was in the Old Guard, and one of their duties that they had is they fly the flags at the Capitol, and they go up and they hang them and they bring them down, and it's constant all day long. They have people doing that, but that was one of the duties he had at one point in time. Representative. Don't eat my apple.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I think Representative Hewitt interrupted you laying the bill over with his closure. So I think we want to make sure that we do indeed lay it over for possible inclusion.
Okay, and the bill is laid over for possible inclusion.
Chair Nelson, your apples are getting a little brown here. I think we've been here for too long today. Well, welcome, Chair Nelson.
And I'll move House File 123 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. And members, this bill would eliminate the duplicative office of the Legislative Budget Office, and in doing so, it would be fiscally responsible to Minnesota taxpayers. While this bill was passed and established only a couple years ago, it has not yet been fully implemented. Now is the time for us to review this before it takes full effect. As I said, it is a duplication of current function of the MMB and a wasteful expansion of government. Currently, fiscal notes are done by the Minnesota Management and Budget Office. And even if we allow the LBO to go forward, they would still have to provide that information to the LBO from all the different state offices so that the LBO could create the fiscal note. So we're duplicating what's already being done. So there is not, and there would not be any corresponding reduction in state employees at the MMB with the creation of this office. Also, the MMB employees that do these functions have other duties during the year when we're not in session, and that would not be true with the LBO, which is set up to provide us fiscal analysis during session, which is 5 months in a budget year and 2 or 3 months in non-budget years. It would not have other work to do that is to be assigned to them. Again, this is fiscally irresponsible use of our taxpayer dollars. In 2012, the legislative auditor did a program audit on the fiscal note process and provided a report that with recommendations for improvements. While they did find other states have their own legislative budget offices, that was not one of the recommendations that they have for ways to improve the process. Currently, when I wrote this, there was only 1 or 2 people working for them. Now they've got 4 or 5, and they've actually been working alongside our MMB right now helping with the fiscal notes to learn how the process is being done. So again, they're just duplicating. They're doubling up. By shutting this office down now before it goes much farther, we can save money for the state. We are also hearing that their current budget is not large enough to be able to do the work required. They're asking for double, almost triple the size of their budget. And I mean, the current budget is $864,000, $860 next year, but they want to hire 6 more additional people for, again, $600,000 more. So, members, that's what the bill does. It's eliminating this office and moving forward and trying to streamline the fiscal note process.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Do you have any testifiers?
I have no testifiers.
Member comments? Member questions? Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of comments, and I'll probably leave those for other members. But, I think this goes to maybe the core of government. When I've been to NCSL and other events, and we talk about the separation of powers, which this really is about, they kind of scratch their head when they think about the fact that we have the executive branch articulating how things run around here in terms of, rather than observe that we don't have control over, some part of our own business. I don't think it's duplicative at all. I think it really goes to the point of this is an opportunity for Minnesota to kind of come up to speed with the rest of the nation in terms of having our separate OMB, or in this case LBO, as opposed to have it under the jurisdiction, kind of look like the fox counting the chickens, with regard to the executive branch. And I would dare say that the governor in the lawsuit said that this very office of the Legislative Budget Office was an integral part of legislative integrity. And so it runs counter to the observations and or the motives of the majority to remove it at just the juncture when it comes online and I think can provide great service to both houses, and particularly in both parties to the legislature. So I certainly, while I appreciate the desire to save money, the budget, I think, is about $700,000 or $800,000, when in the broader context, the bills that have been brought forward raise taxes by billions of dollars. But yet we're talking about an agency that really is commissioned to review the authenticity and the veracity of the bills that we put forward. So I am adamantly opposed to this bill, and I hope that the chair would take under consideration other avenues of saving the taxpayer money.
Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the bill author, the LBO's mission says that it's to be nonpartisan and without regard to political factors. I'm wondering how you feel that works now with MMB doing this.
Mr. Chair.
Well, Mr. Chair, members, while I've heard rumblings from both parties, at different times about the fiscal notes they get from management and budget, Minnesota management and budget. As the legislative budget office or the legislative auditor's report shows, they do a pretty good job of bringing forth notes that reflect what the bills are going to cost, and it's their estimate of the cost. And whether we, when we do the legislation, sometimes we can ignore those, sometimes we can't, sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. So I do not feel that it would be any less nonpartisan than the current system that is, because most of the people that supply that information are full-time staff. They're not political appointees that are coming up with these numbers.
Representative Vogel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And MMB has a commissioner. Who appoints the commissioner?
Chair Nelson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Vogel, the governor, whoever party that is, but again, the people below them, the people that do the work and come up with the numbers are not the commissioner, but the full-time employees of the state of Minnesota, and most of them, they're nonpartisan, we don't know what party they are. They're full-time employees. They're not political appointees.
Representative Vogel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, but does the commissioner have the authority to retain the staff that he or she so chooses?
Chair Nelson.
It's my understanding that the commissioner has not the authority to come in and do wholesale firings of people, that people are hired and put in positions based on their merit, and they go through the process, and they have union contracts to protect them in their jobs. That's why in the federal level we have similar, what they call the Hatch Act, which people are not supposed to be politically active.
Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that Hatch Act applies to us?
Mr. Chair, no.
So there is the possibility that people looking to the top might see this person as their ultimate boss because that's the person in charge there, right?
Chair Nelson.
That's always, anything's possible.
So with that information, do you really believe the governor's office can give us the same assurance that it's going to be nonpartisan and without regard to political factors, as is prescribed in the statute, which is bipartisan and bicameral?
Chair Nelson.
Mr. Chair, members, I see this as a duplication of a process we already have that is working well, and just having a different office doing it when they have to go to those same people that you're saying are partisan to get the numbers in the first place, to get the information in the first place, because that's where they're going to get the information from. It's just duplicating something that's already being done, and it's, again, to me it's a wasteful spending of our taxpayer dollars.
Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but the question was the assurance that I or any of us have as a legislator that the fiscal notes are always, every time, prepared without any political bias. They're prepared nonpartisan and without regard to political factors. How can the governor's office assure us of that when indeed the person that is running the office, the person that's a commissioner, is appointed by the governor, who serves at his or her pleasure and is actually the ultimate employer of that department?
Chair Nelson, do you wish to continue to
I-
expand, or?
I can't make
Question answered?
assurances for what the governor office is going to do, and I can't, and have anything that can happen in the future. I can't predict that.
Representative Vogel.
Okay, well, okay, another idea, thought here that's brought up is separation of powers. We are the ones that have to write the check. We are the ones that are ultimately responsible for the check's outcome. The estimate of the expenditures is being done by what we can't totally establish as a nonpartisan entity. So therefore, when I look at things, and therefore may not be quite as objective as it should be, and I would go back, and I'm not taking on Minshore necessarily as an entity or what should or shouldn't have been done, but if you look back through that note, it wasn't overly accurate because some of the assumptions were done with, if you look back in that note, with what would be considered maybe a little bit of a political side. Worse yet, MNLARs. We are now struggling with MNLARs, okay? From what I can determine, there was not a fiscal note on MNLARs. Now, if somebody was looking out for the legislature, from what I could find out, MNLARs was set up initially as a $12 million, 3-year appropriation in the governor's budget, who happened to be of my party, but it was set up that way without a fiscal note. When you don't have a fiscal note, you don't have assumptions. You don't have any way to hold people accountable to what should have happened. And therefore, when we get into problems like that, a big part of it goes back to how did we put this thing together in the first place? And that's why I'm so adamant about us having people that we hire, nonpartisan, bicameral, doing these things because they are responsible to us. Their payroll is responsible to us because it's being done through the LCC. They are truly our employees looking out for our best interest. That's the point I'm trying to make here. And I go back to the thing that right now we cannot be assured when these things are put together, and I don't think anybody here can be assured when these things are put together that there's never any partisan interest in it. We are responsible for that checkbook, and we're responsible. And now, for something that started off as $12 million a year for 3 years, is now costing, well, excuse me, well in excess of $100 million because it didn't start right. We're responsible. The other thing that I'd like to call to your attention is if you go down to line 1.14, it says that there has to be reasonable opportunities for the 5 people that have taken their job with the intent of representing our interest. It doesn't say that they're going to get a job. It says that they have to be presented with reasonable opportunities. So not only have we put together a good office with an excellent director who has hired good people that have come here because they want to work for us, but now we're going to say, go out and get another job. First of all, it doesn't reflect well on us as a state. But secondly, and more importantly, it's not going to reflect well on our efforts going forward. Because we need this. We need the objectivity. We need the confidence that these notes are put together because, again, we are the one that write the check. We are the ones that are now having to write extra checks for MNLARs. And I'd contend, as much as I respect the chair, that this is not a good idea and that we have to move forward because not only is it about us, but it's about every future legislator that comes through here, looks at that thing, and wants to have the confidence to know that when they write out the check of the taxpayers' money, that the information that they're relying on to do that with is as objective and as bipartisan and bicameral as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Next on the list, I have Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wanted to share an example that I experienced a year ago, 2 years ago, in this committee. Brought forth a bill that was going to do some changes in minute that actually would have resulted in about a $10 million savings. And we got the fiscal note back from MMB, and wouldn't you know it, to save 10 million, they said it was going to cost us 14 million. And that was kind of a, head scratcher. So we pressed them on that, and after we pressed them on that, guess what came back? Oh, Representative Nash is right. This would save $10 million. $24 million swing. And it was sort of a hot button issue at the time because some folks felt, and even the chair, you said from the floor that we were gutting the hell out of government. This was your quote on the floor. This is a potentially political situation that you're creating here, Mr. Chair. And I think of the LBO a lot like I think of Mr. Nobles. Mr. Nobles, I think, could get a meeting in anybody's office at any time and would leave that meeting and people would say, oh, he's a very fair guy. His whole staff, very fair people, has a consistent strike zone, calls, balls, and strikes, exactly the same every single time. Now, we're in a divided legislature right now, and we have a DFL governor, as you know, but that could change. And I would ask you to consider, do you want to have somebody who holds partisan office appointing partisan commissioners making the decision on what your fiscal note looks like? Because, again, $24 million swing. What a deal, huh? So think about that as you're coming to your conclusion as to what you're going to do on this. And, there's a fair number of freshmen here, and you haven't experienced this yet, but you're going to. You're going to see wild inconsistencies. In fact, Representative Hertas pointed one out just, hours ago, sadly. But he pointed one out where the math was wrong in the fiscal note. Now, I don't know if that was because it was just an honest mistake in math or what. But I think that if we have an impartial third-party group of people with that consistent strike zone, that why would you be opposed to that? Why would you want to repeal that? It just says to the people who are outside of these walls that we're making our decisions based on financial information that we're getting from somebody who has no dog in the fight. And as a legislator, when you go back to your district, you should actually hope to be able to say that to the people you represent, that the fiscal information that we get is as unbiased as possible. And as a result of that information, we made a decision one way or another to move forward on this policy. So, Mr. Chair, I know that you were opposed to this for a very long time, and we've hashed this out as Representative Vogel moved this through the process. But when I've gone to NCSL events, just like Representative Albright mentioned, and I talked about that we have a essentially partisan office creating our fiscal notes. To his point, they scratch their head and they look at me like I've got a third arm, and who knows, I might. But they're confused as to why would a legislature allow that to perpetuate itself. And members, I think that this is important enough that you want to really consider how you feel about this, because impartiality is a very good thing, and the LBO is going to deliver impartiality. And for the life of me, I can't understand why this bill would come forward, because we should all be aspiring to as non-biased a piece of data as we possibly can achieve. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Nash. Next, I have Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just pose this question to those of us in the room that have been here more than 3 months. But one of the questions that's occurred to me is, we're in session for about 5 months this year, 3 or 4 months next year. What was it envisioned that the members of the office would do the other 7 to 9 months of the year?
Yes, Representative Vogel.
Thank you. To that question, one of the things that we've never really done that I can see that we're doing is going back and looking at the fiscal notes that have already been done. So we get this thing in front of us this morning, very complicated, and we pass the bill, and it happens, and then it goes away. My feeling is that this is, yes, it is a fiscal note office, but during the remainder of the year, to watch out for our interest. There is a lot of stuff going on that could preemptively be looked at. Or go back and review these notes, because the way I have learned about my mistakes or the things that I haven't done right is to go back and look at what I did, compare it to the reality, because we know a fiscal note is never going to come true. It's an estimate. So let's go back and let's look at these things. And I think that, to me, is the reason that I've been so vehement on this thing, is that we're putting it together because they are responsible to us. We have 4 people from the House, 4 people from the Senate, bipartisan, that are going to meet with this. And the other thing that's happened as we've gone through this process is we as legislators on that commission have learned a lot more about fiscal notes than even people. I was surprised with the questions that we got, even from the people that had been here for a while, looking at the fiscal note process. And when you look at this as from a business standpoint, what better thing can you do before you spend the money to look at how the money is going to be spent and then to question it? But to then go back afterwards and say, did this really work out the way we did? And if it didn't, why?
Oh, I have a follow-up.
Representative Vogel, hindsight can be 2020, but Representative Elkins, I guess you had a follow-up comment?
An additional question, actually, but unless, Representative, did you want to respond, to add on to that line?
Oh, sorry, Representative Albright.
Yeah. Representative Elkins, I think, to the point of what are the staff and the department going to do in the interim? We live in a situation where our legislative calendar may say that it's between January and May, or February and May. That doesn't necessarily mean that we stop doing our work in the interim, nor does any other commission that's put together, whether that be pensions or any of the other councils that we've enabled to look at matters. And I would look at this very seriously from the perspective of, that last count, I think we're close to 2,500 or 2,600 bills. Not all of them are relevant to policy. And so as a function of calling balls and strikes on those, I think, we sometimes force fiscal notes in a less timely fashion than is appropriate. I mean, you take a look at the one that we just hashed through. It went for 4 iterations. I think, and still there are questions, and as MMB articulated afterwards, there's information in there that is errored, and so they have to revise it. So wouldn't it be better to continue to function where we have a standalone, autonomous, impartial, nonpartisan agency or entity that could provide us with that information throughout the course of a biennium? And I would dare say that the enabling language in here, we've heard about duplication with MMB. It's not, because the enabling language transfers that from MMB to the OMB. It is no longer under the purview of MMB, so there's no duplication. We are moving it to an office that has at its core the responsibility for being impartial and nonpartisan. And I think if we want to raise the bar and actually aspire to more excellent work on behalf of the people that sent here, then I can find no better way to do that than through the enactment and support of the OMB.
Representative Elkins, any follow-up?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for those comments for both Representative Vogel and Albright, because I can already know about 3 or 4 projects that I volunteered for the interim that would benefit from this kind of analysis eventually. Other thing that I'll just, an observation from a newbie, is that I would say that some of the fiscal notes, and I'm still learning how to read fiscal notes. There seems to be an art to that, but I'm seeing things that I wouldn't characterize as partisan so much as self-serving, perhaps. And no matter whether it's our legislative office or MMB, we still have to. Staff is still going to be going back to the agencies to provide the raw data for the estimates. And I'm not sure how we get around the fact that the agencies, whether they're providing the numbers to MMB or providing numbers to one of our bodies, is how we catch them from prevent them from providing us self-serving estimates.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair, to that point, just as a
yes,
follow-up.
Representative
Thank you.
Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Rep. Representative Elkins, that's a fair observation, but I draw your attention to the work of the OLA. I can find no person that I would hold in higher esteem that was enacted and charged with, to Representative Nash's point, calling balls and strikes and being thorough, being forthright, and being candid and honest in his observations and the analysis that he provides to us. Because if there's any agency or any entity that could sway the decision-making process that we go through in any committee where his reports would be relevant, he is burdened with the responsibility of being impartial and nonpartisan, and he has done it with great accomplishment. And I think he, just like what we've established with the OMB, what we're doing is we're trying to establish that type of excellence that we would rely upon, and it would make our jobs more relevant, more timely, and I think we would be held in higher esteem by our constituents based upon the knowledge and the facts pattern that we utilize to make those decisions.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Representative Albright.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Chair Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And speaking of Mr. Nobles and the Office of the Legislative Auditor, from one of his reports that we all hold dear and we trust, the 2010 legislature directed MMB to assess, among other things, the merits of transferring the responsibility for preparing fiscal notes to the legislature. The resulting report did not recommend that the legislative staff prepare notes, fiscal notes. It is said that most people in the executive office and the legislative branches interviewed for the study did not think a new office would be an optimal solution to address legislative concerns about fiscal notes. The report said that it would cost 67% more for a legislative office to prepare the Human Services fiscal notes than for the Department of Human Services to do so. And due to the eligibility of the legislative office to claim federal funding for this purpose. Overall, the report recommendations recommended various improvements to the fiscal note process rather than changes in the organizational responsibility for fiscal note preparation. So our legislative auditor, who we've just said here, we all respect, does not think we should be changed. We should have done this. We should have put this over to a new office, that we should leave it where it is. And there are improvements that were in this report. One of the ones that he suggested was having authors of bills being able to refute and go back and look at the notes and try and figure them out, and refute some of the assumptions in there, like has been done in the past, to get back at that, maybe some differences or things that were unexpected.
Thank you, Chair Nelson.
Mr. Chair, if I might just reply to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chair Nelson, that report was put together 6 years ago, and based upon bipartisan support between both parties at the time and the governor, we made a decision that it was right to put this into place. And candidly, we could do that with the OMB as well, as pick up the phone, much like we go up to the revisor's office and consult with them about bills right now. The opportunity to consult with a nonpartisan staff about legislation and how it would affect agencies or constituencies without the cloud of judgment or without the specter of taint from either party, I think serves both parties, regardless of who becomes or who is in charge of this this institution. I think it begs the question in terms of just a true balance of power and a true separation of the branches of government. And I think that's reflective upon all of us. And I would hope that you would reconsider this bill.
Thank you, Representative Albright. Representative Hertas, you've been waiting patiently at the end of the table. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just like to expand a little bit on what has been said already. I share also your concern about duplicity and wasting money, but I don't look at this as necessarily wasting money. First of all, I don't buy the argument that the folks that are currently doing the fiscal notes are needed, or at least the number of staff are needed to do what they're doing now. If they're saying that while we're in session and they're able to do all of this extra work with no extra burden, would beg the question what they too are doing when we're not in session. But I think, analogous of something that happened recently in the real estate industry and the mortgage banking crisis, it used to be that realtors could procure the appraiser or recommend an appraiser. The mortgage originator, the person who is going to be paid a fee to select the mortgage appraiser, all of that was greatly influenced by the relationship in a transaction. And what we found is today the reforms are such that realtors cannot talk to the mortgage appraiser or have any direct contact or influence in permitting the independent voice to make a fair assessment or valuation of property. Now, in my opinion, Chair Nelson, numbers are numbers. They're not very subjective. They are what they are. And wherever the data is and it has to be retrieved, whether it's in-house research or in MMB or whatever repository would hold numbers, that's really given. But we make all of our decisions, and these fiscal notes are built upon assumptions which are very subjective. And so I'm particularly concerned not because of the direct influence of the executive branch and maybe the executive's agenda, but it really begs the question in terms of integrity, whether or not, those partisan appointments that head up these agencies or head up these departments aren't under some type of pressure to at least produce documents that are more consistent with the goals and the agenda of the administration. Secondly, with regard to our role as legislators, we would like to know that there's none of that influence whatsoever. And we really have to be the taxpayers' fiduciary in putting forth good legislation based on good assumptions. And that's not to say that assumptions aren't going to be flawed either, but at least you take away the influence. And so if it costs some extra money to do this, given that we have to manage a $50 billion budget, I don't think it's too much of a price to pay to make sure that in the fiscal notes we're getting that we're making the best decisions. And in many cases, different fiscal notes might influence our decision that would be less costly than the decisions we make under the current system. And it works both ways. I get that part of it. But I would hope that that you would maybe have a more open mind about this. I do believe that all of the staff in MMB are not any longer necessary if we establish this. I think in Gov Finance, we heard there's approximately 2,500 fiscal notes are prepared. It might have been 1,500 or 2,500, but I remember doing a quick math based on the appropriation, and it was like $280 a fiscal note on average. And of course, some of them are pretty simple and are just a single page kind of fiscal note that come out, and then some of them are very, very detailed, like the one we looked at earlier today with multiple pages, and those take quite a bit of time, and I can't imagine that a document like we had earlier today regarding House Bill 5 was built anything less than several thousands of dollars in terms of staff time to put together something like that and have a report. But there too, it's all, again, based on assumptions, and I think we just need to remove that question or cloud. And we are a divided state. We've been divided for decades, And we have broad constituencies, and, you know, who has control of the body swings back and forth every so often. And so that suggests, at least, and even when I was talking with Governor Walz recently, he said to me, well, I'm very confident or very okay and comfortable with saying that more than 1 million people didn't vote for me. And I want to have one Minnesota kind of thing. And I said, well, I welcome that spirit and that attitude. And if we're willing to recognize that it's not always, you know, the vision in the shoes that we walk individually, but there's always a point of view on the other side of the aisle as well. I think just removing the cloud, and we use that term in real estate oftentimes, if a title has got a cloud on it, it's better to not have that cloud. And I think that this is really a good step forward, and we should really embrace this autonomy and independence, and then be able to rely on the fact that we're doing the very best that we can do to make sure that nobody's got any influence on how these fiscal notes come out, good, bad, or indifferent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Hertaus. Appreciate the commentary. So we've got Representative Vogel, and then Representative Freiberg's going to say a few things. He said he promised he'd be brief, and then Chair Nelson's going to take us home. So those are the last three on the list. You want to close it up? Okay, Representative Freiberg.
I just wanted to say thank you, Chair Nelson, for bringing this bill. I think it's a good bill. You know, the budget outlook is not quite as rosy as it was during the time of the November forecast, so it's good to see we're looking for ways to save money and eliminate redundancies. I think the timing is right for this. It's good to do this, I think, before the office is fully staffed. But I do like that the bill also requires the people who are currently employees to be offered comparable employment. So just felt like I should throw some love towards your bill.
Yeah. All right.
So thanks.
All right. Thanks, Representative Freiberg. Representative Vogel, and then Chair Nelson will close us out.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll throw good feelings toward Representative Nelson because I respect him. Unfortunately, on this one, we do disagree, and just a few things. First of all, it was said that the agencies, that the LBO would be preparing the bill, the fiscal notes. That's not true. The agencies will still be preparing just like they do now because they're in the best shape to do that. What will happen is the LBO will question and then review them on our behalf so that the information is that we're getting is made sure to benefit us. Secondly, the idea of the, and I've read the OLA report a number of times, of course, as we've gone through this, and I agree it says that in there, but there's also quite a bit in there about separation of powers. And I know that Auditor Nobles has a great respect for separation of powers, so, you know, we can pick bits and pieces out of something, but by the same token, I think when we're looking at this is fundamentally about division of powers, separation of powers. I found in business that a good CFO has never cost me a penny. And the reason I say that is because if I hire a CFO and that person doesn't save me more than I spent on that person, I made the mistake, they didn't. Their job is to go in and find out what's best for the company and report to the management. We can relate this LBO to a CFO because they're working on our behalf with the numbers to make sure things are right. Fourth, we've got a good staff already. This isn't about starting something. This is about ending something that is already going. There are 6 people working there. I think we've got nearly a $100 million target increase over base. So we've already got good people. We're looking at basically firing some good people before they get a chance to do what they're already training to do. So as we move forward, folks, I would really ask that you consider, and as much as I don't like to get into kind of political things, I am going to ask for this thing to be tabled and that we do a roll call because I don't sense the chair or the chair would be too enhanced with doing that himself. So I make a motion to table and a roll call, please.
Okay. Yes. So no debates. Roll call has been requested. To be clear in terms of the motion is to table Can you please repeat the motion?
The motion is to lay it on the table, yes.
Okay, the motion is delayed on the table.
Chair Nelson,
No.
Vice Chair Carlson,
No?
Representative Albright,
Yes.
Representative Elkins,
No.
Representative Freiberg. No. Representative Hertas,
Yes.
Representative Huot,
No.
Representative Cleavorn.
No.
Representative Lippert.
No.
Representative Long.
No.
Representative Mason. No. Representative Nash.
Yes.
Representative Vogel.
Yes.
There are 4 ayes and 9 noes. The motion does not pass. Chair Nelson, closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the spirited discussion. Like I said in my remarks, currently, the MMB, they move people from other tasks while we're in session to help with the fiscal note process. And those people, was that question, what do they do now? Well, they go back to other jobs that they do, just like the snowplow drivers we've had that have been clearing snow off our streets and out of our parking lots at the state capitol here. When there isn't snow, they have other duties they go to and they do, and that's what's currently happening with an MMB. With the Legislative Budget Office, they are there, their office is there to provide us with fiscal notes. When we're not here, we don't need fiscal notes. And so they'll be sitting around not having tasks to do or very little tasks to do, and to me, that's a waste of our taxpayer dollars. So with that, I'd like the bill to be laid over for possible inclusion.
So thank you, Chair Nelson. With that, we'll lay over House File 123 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. All in favor? No, wait a minute, nope, sorry, no.
No vote. And members, before we adjourn, we have, just so you know what we're scheduling for our omnibus bill, on the 7th, April 7th, Sunday, we're going to release the bill. It'll be online. Monday on the Monday the 8th, looking at the right day on the calendar here, we're going to do our walkthrough on the bill from 12 to 3. Then Tuesday morning at our normal time, we'll start public testimony, and then 3 to midnight after that, we're going to start marking up the bill and pass it out of here. And if we don't get that done Wednesday morning at our normal time, we'll move into that. Also, we don't have state government, or don't have government operations that's coming in after us. So both on Monday, or excuse me, both on Tuesday and on Wednesday, if possible, we can bleed into that time that the government operations would normally have our room. And so that's the schedule we have going forward. We have bills next week that will be, I think we've got Monday or Tuesday already posted, but we'll be posting bills to finish up next week. So
Chair Nelson, real quick, can you provide any information on the amendment deadline?
is it 3 o'clock we said? No, Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, yes, that was what we talked about.
Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock is deadline for amendments. Any other questions, comments? With that, we are adjourned. Have a good weekend, everybody.